All right, good morning. Welcome to Blades of Beauty, Ornamental Grasses. My name is Jamie Heflin, and I'm here with a few housekeeping notes before I hand the reins over to Shannon and Nikki. This is a webinar, so your camera and microphone are muted. If you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A box. Nikki and Shannon will be answering questions throughout the webinar, as well as at the end of the presentation. We do value your feedback, so we'll have a couple of quick anonymous polls just to gather some input from you on. This webinar is being recorded. This is the final webinar in our 4-part winter webinar series. All of the webinar recordings will be available on our YouTube channel by April 1st. This presentation is eligible for 1 CEU credit. For those of you who indicated you are interested in earning CEUs, you will receive an email at the conclusion of the webinar, which has the required quiz for your completion. I am also happy to report that our 2025 winter webinar series has raised over $1,700, which will be divided between Landscape Illinois, or formerly known as ILCA, the Conservation Foundation, and the Illinois chapter of ASLA. These are all organizations that we're very proud to support and partner with. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters. As Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Midwest Ground Covers, Nikki oversees the strategy and tactical development of the sales, marketing, and shipping logistics teams. She is heavily involved in company-wide strategic planning and goal setting. And Nikki also sits on the board of the Landscape Illinois organization. Shannon McInerney is product manager here at Midwest Ground Covers, where she oversees purchasing and is responsible for product line development and the plant accession and trial process. She also coordinates work in the Midwest Gardens. Besides her work at Midwest, Shannon is a member of the Perennial Plant Association Board of Directors, the College of DuPage Hort Advisory Board, and the Landscape Illinois Awards Committee. All right, so now I'm going to kick it off with a quick poll before we get started. And this one is to find out how often you use ornamental grasses in your projects. Do you use them a lot, frequently, sometimes? Give people just a minute here to respond. All right, it looks like kind of a lot of use. So good, very good. You're in the right place.
Yeah, we figured that this is a really popular group of plants, but there's so many varieties now, so it's good that we'll talk about a lot of them today.
All right, and then one more poll here before Shannon starts us off. And this one is, you should be able to do the drop down where you can choose what genus you use most frequently.
Yeah,
There's quite a few to look at here, so.
we know we get a lot of choices, but all right. Yeah, I think Sporobolus is not a big surprise. That's one I was kind of expecting. Carex, there's so many, and same with Panicum. So cool. All right. Well, we're gonna do kind of a recap at the end to get a follow-up on that. So, all right, well, welcome everyone. We have a lot to go over, so we'll get going. So the way we thought we could best go through this information was by dividing the grasses into cool season grasses and warm season grasses. So just to give a quick overview of cool season grasses, these are plants that are going to grow best in more mild conditions, so soil temperatures around 50 to 65 degrees, air temperatures around 60 to 75 degrees. So in our area, that's generally spring and fall. So that's when these plants are actively growing in those times. It's also the best time to transplant these types of grasses. And so often, but not always, these are spring bloomers, and they typically need more moisture in their active growing periods, although they don't necessarily want to be overwatered. And they really don't want to be overwatered when they go into dormant season. So when it gets hotter and warmer throughout the summer, a lot of these plants kind of slow down, stop growing, and they definitely want to be on the drier side then. So if we go to the next slide, we just have a few examples. Well, that's Deschampsia in front of us right now. So this is our conifer garden at our main office in St. Charles. So you can see kind of in the foreground there, that's Deschampsia goldtau. Kind of in the along the or kind of middle back, like in front of that weeping spruce, that's Sesleria autumnalis. And then we also have some Sesleria greenlee in this garden. And then if we go to the next slide, again, kind of right in the foreground there, some more of the Sesleria autumnalis. So just highlighting, you know, some of the ways we've used these grasses in the landscape. They're generally shorter, so they make for good kind of matrix plantings and things like that. And then I'm gonna hand it over to Nikki for our first genus.
All right, so we're going to start off with Carex, and you may be a little confused because it's not actually a grass, but people use Carex like they use grasses, so we thought we should talk about some of the especially newer species or varieties out there. We're not really going to touch on many native Carex today, so if you're interested in that, we've had a past webinar that you could check out on YouTube, so like I said, Carex is not a grass, but used in similar application. So that's why we're going to talk about it today. It's actually one of the largest genera of vascular species. So there's over 2,000 species of Carex out in the world. And they frequently hybridize with each other. So there's kind of like new versions of Carex being created at all times. They're found in almost every ecosystem worldwide, and they are cool season. So not a cool season grass, but cool season meaning they do the majority of their growing in the spring and the fall. If you're ever out and wondering if something's a carex, a grass, or a sedge, which is another group, sedges have edges, rushes are round, but grasses have nodes from their tips to the ground. So you can use that little limerick, it's almost St. Patrick's Day, to kind of figure out what you might be dealing with in carex or sedges. So with that, because there's such a huge genera, they are more sensitive to cultural settings like soil type, water, salinity. So we really need to make sure that when we choose a carex, they're sited appropriately. So with that, we'll jump into the different species and varieties we're going to talk about. So the first one is a native carex. So it's a newer one that we just started carrying, but this one does have a pretty wide range here in the United States, but also native to Illinois. If you guys like Carex bromoides, this one actually resembles Carex bromoides pretty closely. Might be just a little bit more compact, but similar habit, stays in a nice clump. It's deer resistant. This one in particular can handle a bigger range of soil types because it's found in so many places in the United States. It can handle sand, it can handle clay. So going to do well in most even garden settings. It does prefer soil on the drier side. It's very drought tolerant, so probably not best for any sort of wetter area in your gardens, but it does exceptionally well in dry shade. So that's one of the questions we get a lot. This plant is well suited for that. It does prefer more shade than sun, and in full sun, it can do a little bit of browning, but not too bad. And it is semi-evergreen, but not great for mowing. So this was part of the Mount Cuba report, and it scored low in mowing. So that's Carex albicans or white-tinged sedge. Next Carex we have for you is Feather Falls. So this is a newer one for us. You guys might be familiar with ice dance. We were really attracted to this plant. The foliage is a little bit, I would say, finer, strappier than ice dance, which we kind of liked. And then it's sun and shade tolerance. So it has a pretty wide range of tolerance, but really, really sun tolerant. And sometimes with that variegation, you can see more burning in full sun. This one does exceptionally well. Feather Falls is a tri-specific hybrid, meaning it's a cross between 3 different Carex species, so pretty fancy Carex there. It can also be a great replacement for Liripe variegata. Liripe variegata is extremely slow growing. It's hard to grow for us in production. So this one is a bit more vigorous and will cover more ground more quickly. It has, like I said, excellent heat and sun tolerance. The one thing to keep in mind on this one is it does like good drainage. It does not like to sit in a lot of water, so make sure that you're siting it in an appropriate place. We do have a question. Does it get that wide? So interesting enough, when we've seen it at Walters, I think they have some older patches of it. It is pretty wide,
Yeah.
much wider than ice dance.
I was gonna say, that is not a lie. I planted it
No.
at home way too close together and I'm totally regretting it now. So yes, it does get that wide.
Yeah. So I guess it's an economical Carex. You have to plant less for more space. So and it is evergreen. So with these Carex, if you have ice dance or even this one, Feather Falls, you're going to want to do some selective pruning in the spring, but you really don't need to prune it all the way back to the ground. So just kind of clean up anything that's brown. All right, and our last Carex for today is Carex Gersau, or Nordic blade sedge, which is easier to say for those of you that don't speak Danish like me. So this plant actually did come over from Denmark through our partnership with our Nordic breeders over there. So very cool Carex. Gets a little bit on the taller side, 24 to 36 inches tall. But the thing that really knocked our socks off about this plant is its black seed heads. Now they don't stay persistently black like that, but in the spring, it is so attention grabbing. I've never seen anything like it in the landscape. Now, as it starts to flower, it will kind of turn a tan color, and then those seed heads will go tan for the remainder of the season. But very, very nice Carex, clump forming, and it did perform better in partial shade for us here when we were trialing it. And we did trial it for a number of years before introducing it. So, Shannon, do you have anything to add on this one? Because I feel like you were more closely involved in the trials on this one.
Yeah, I mean, if people have been to our trial garden that was down by the patio, we did have this one planted for probably close to 5 years, maybe even more. We had to move it this fall when we did some reconstruction, but so they were pretty mature plants, and that size is pretty accurate. The coloring was better in kind of I told Nikki partial shade, but it probably partial shade to shade. We had it in a bit sunnier spot, and the foliage was just a bit more yellow looking. So kind of a little bit moister, a little bit shadier. It's probably going to be happier in those conditions. So.
All right, well, that is your Carex update for today. So I'll throw it to Shannon for the next genus.
All right, so we are going to go to Deschampsia, and there are about 60 species of Deschampsia found across all 7 continents, which is kind of cool. There are several species native to North America, but by far the most popular is Deschampsia cespitosa. So that is what we are going to talk about, along with a couple cultivars of that. So these are clump-forming, finely textured grasses. Occasionally they can be semi-evergreen. I think here we're probably a little too cold for that. I went and checked on a couple of the different cultivars or species we have in the landscape, and you can see like a little bit of green on them now. But you know, they primarily are looking brown. So I would say not really semi-evergreen here. They also have those airy inflorescences, which are really nice and attractive, attractive to both humans and seeds for birds and waterfowl. The one thing about this plant, particularly when we talk about the straight species, is it can be a bit susceptible to rust. So make sure you are not overwatering it, and good air circulation will also help. So we will move to the straight species, Deschampsia cespitosa. So this is going to be the tallest of the three that we cover today. And this is native to northeastern Illinois and then the western. It's kind of interesting how it breaks down on the map. It's like the western US, the eastern US, and then like kind of sporadically in between. But it is native to us up here in northeastern Illinois. So it prefers moist, organically rich soil, often is found in woodlands or bogs. This is probably one of the best grasses for tolerating a little bit more shade across, all the varieties that we're going to talk about today. So like I said, the species is the largest and the earliest blooming, so it kind of has those light green to yellow inflorescences. It will bloom the best in full sun, but if you're not as concerned about the bloom, it can go in a little bit more shade. I would also say the seed heads on this, probably because it's the biggest, are a little bit more airy looking, whereas we get to some of the others that are a little more dense on the plant. And as I mentioned, we've seen the most rust issues with this compared to some of the cultivars. So then next up, we have Deschampsia cespitosa goldtau, or gold-dew tufted hairgrass. So this is a bit shorter than the species. Like I said, the flowers are kind of a bit more compact into the plant. And as the name implies, this has really beautiful kind of chartreuse yellow seed heads that then they transition to brown as the season goes on. And so this is a nice densely flowering plant. As I mentioned, we have this one pretty prominently planted in the conifer garden. So there's a nice display of it there. Nice clump forming, so gets good coverage, but is not going to get too aggressive on you. And then last, we have the smallest of the grouping, and this is Deschampsia cespitosa pixie fountain. So this was a seed introduction by Gelito, and it is 18 to 24 inches tall and wide. It's a bit narrower than it is tall, so a pretty slim profile. And this has a bit more silvery white flowers that mature to brown. So a bit, all of them have relatively fine foliage, but finer foliage too. So it's just kind of like, how big do you want your Deschampsia to be? And we have several options. So that is the Deschampsia.
All right, next we're going to talk about Festuca or fescue. So this is another really wide reaching genera. It's on every continent except Antarctica. So can be found all throughout the world. There's an estimate of about 500 species worldwide. In general, most fescue do prefer it a little bit on the drier side, but they're used in a lot of different ways. There's of course, ornamental fescue, which we're going to talk about today. There's turf fescue, and then there's other fescues used more for pasture and hay for livestock. So it's kind of interesting. It just has such a wide variety of plants that are used for a wide variety of applications. So, but we're going to talk about a couple ornamental ones today. So first one is going to be Festuca glauca Elijah Blue. This one you guys should be familiar with. It's been around for a really long time, an oldie but goodie. The straight species is native to Central and Southern Europe, specifically in the areas northeast of Spain and a little bit into Italy. It can be semi-evergreen. I have this one planted in my yard. It tends to be semi-evergreen. Can come out of winter a little bit ratty looking. You can cut it back to the ground, and it will reflush for you. The nice thing about this plant is it is deer tolerant because of the glaucous leaves. Deer generally don't find that delicious. And it can look poor in hot, humid summer. So afternoon shade can help keep the foliage looking fresher, but it may just look a little less blue. needs well-drained soils, again, on the drier side. If it's sitting too wet or, wet over the winter, you can lose the plant, and good for containers. So this one has a pretty small profile, that width only 6 to 8 inches tall. So you could use this one in an annual container, mixed with annuals would look nice. So that's Festuca Elijah Blue. A newer one that we've started carrying is Festuca Cool as Ice. So this one in general is going to be a bit bigger. You can see that width is substantially bigger than Elijah Blue. This one's a cross between Festuca glauca and Festuca idahoensis, which idahoensis is actually native to the western part of the country, like the Idaho area, as the name kind of says. This one really, really wants dry soil, so make sure you're siting it correctly. Again, can be semi-evergreen, deer tolerant, just like Elijah Blue. Most Festuca do like frequent division, so you guys can do that every 2 to 3 years in the spring. Differences from Elijah Blue, again, wider spread. It will have a bit bluer of color. We have seen a color improvement. It's just way more vibrant in the landscape, and much heavier seeding and flower heads. So on Elijah Blue every year, I think I get like a couple, and it's not very exciting. The seed heads on Cool as Ice are just amazing, and that picture really captures what you can expect. And then Cool as Ice also has a little bit better heat tolerance, so you won't see as much browning of the foliage in the summer months. So
Nikki,
Shannon?
there's a
Yeah.
question on about finding seedlings of Elijah Blue all over the garden, and
Oh,
if Cool as Ice self-sows.
that is a good
I can't
question.
say I've seen any in our gardens, but
No.
so and then a question about both required conditions for Elijah Blue to be long-lived, and if Cool as Ice is different.
So Festuca glauca is a short-lived perennial. So it really is only going to live a couple years for you, because Cool as Ice has that blend of Festuca glauca and Festuca idahoensis. I did not read up on the life cycle or length of the other, but it may have a longer life cycle. I don't, it depends on the siting. I've had Elijah Blue in my garden for a number of years now, and it's doing just fine. So, if it's uber happy, it might self-seed. And if it's not sited correctly, then it may not live as long, especially if it's in heavier wet soils.
Yeah, I think in the display gardens we've seen them both live, but Cool as Ice definitely is a more vigorous looking plant, where
100%.
Elijah Blue can be a little sad looking sometimes. So
Yeah, and a lot of times with the breeding on these, if they've noticed it's short-lived or gets smaller over time and disappears, that's why they add in another species in their breeding to make that plant stronger. So, all right, that is your Festuca group. So next is Shannon.
all right, Sesleria. So Sesleria, this genus is native to Eurasia and North Africa, so not at all to North America, unfortunately. But it was named for Leo Sessler, who was an important figure in 18th century the botanic world. And most of these are clump forming and low growing, and also I think most of them, or all that we're going to talk about today, would be good for green roofs. So it's kind of interesting because while some of the other grasses we're going to talk about, it's just one species, and we're going to talk about a bunch of cultivars. This we're actually talking about three different species or hybrids. So first we have Sesleria albicans, or Balkan moorgrass. So this is going to be the earliest blooming of the Sesleria. So most are probably familiar with autumnalis, which we're going to talk about at the end, which blooms later, but this is going to start blooming right off the bat in spring. So anytime in the next month or so. You can see in that picture of the garden there in the lower left corner, that is the Sesleria albicans there. We couldn't find a better garden picture, but you can see relatively tall seed heads there. they do hold on through a good portion of the season. They're gone now, but through, that was probably in July or so, that picture was taken, and they're still holding on. So nice tan flower heads throughout the season. Foliage is kind of green to blue-green color. It is going to be the narrowest of the Sesleria we're looking at here today, so you will want to plant those relatively close together to get coverage. But this is drought tolerant and grows well in a wide range of soil. So then next we have Sesleria Greenlee hybrid. So this was found by a plantsman, John Greenlee, in his California nursery, and the exact parentage is unknown. But I think there's another Sesleria that we don't carry, but Sesleria caerulea, which is more of a bluish color. This has a little bit of bluish tone to it, so I think it's kind of thought that maybe that's one of the parents, perhaps autumnalis. So this is going to be more compact than Sesleria autumnalis at 8 to 12 inches tall. Again, the color is going to be a bit more kind of medium green to even looks a little blue-green at sometimes. It's adaptable to sun and shade. It can take a wide range of soils. Probably not quite as drought tolerant as autumnalis. It is going to like a bit more moisture, but it's a great ground cover. We planted it again in our conifer garden right in front of the seat wall. There's an area that water kind of tended to run off from the U-pick area, and we planted this pretty tightly, and it was like an instant solution to that erosion problem. So really nice, at holding the soil in place. So this is also going to flower, not quite as early as albicans, but kind of midsummer, and it does hold its flower heads very well. So again, we have some that are a little bit protected, but looking at them yesterday, they still have their seed heads. So we'll go through in the next couple of weeks and clean those up. But that is Greenlee hybrid. And then last, I've kind of mentioned it a few times already, but Sesleria autumnalis, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So those silvery white inflorescences in summer, a bit more kind of bright chartreusey color, especially getting a little more yellow as we get into fall. Drought tolerant, very adaptable, will take some shade, but prefers to be in full sun. So will Sesleria, sorry, just looking at a couple questions. Will Sesleria recover quickly if mowed down or cut back in the spring? I think autumnalis would be fine. I think Greenlee would be okay. I mean, those would be fine to mow. That is a good question I meant to mention. You want to make sure you cut back albicans early enough, because if you don't, you will cut the seed heads off when you do that. So we definitely did that a couple of years ago. So that's one that you want to make sure you're getting, if you have planted, you're getting your cleanups done a little bit earlier so you don't impact the seed heads. So good question. So that is Sesleria.
All right, and now we're going to move on to warm season grasses. So kind of the opposite of what Shannon shared with us with cool season grasses. Warm season grasses are generally the grasses that are going to grow more in the warmer, sunnier, hotter months. Warm season grasses can look dead in the spring and can look dead for a while. If you're an impatient gardener like I am, you will sometimes in early May, think that your grasses didn't come up, but surprised they will. So they just need time, and they need a good amount of heat to come up. So, and we'll kind of go over when we go through this, share some of them that tend to take longer. So again, these are generally going to do most of their growing late spring, early summer, until early fall, and then they go dormant through the winter. Usually better in hotter climates, and better adapted to drought in general. Not blanketly, but in general, these grasses are better for drought. Of course, we do research when we give these presentations, and I thought this was fascinating. So very scientific answer. There are two main pathways that plants can use to capture carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, called C3 and C4. The number refers to the number of carbon atoms that are introduced in the first molecule created during photosynthesis. So our cool season grasses undergo C3 photosynthesis, warm season grasses undergo C4 photosynthesis. So if you're a dork like I am, I love science. I thought that was very interesting and the scientific reason why they're cool season and warm season grasses. So there you have it. So we'll jump into some photos of what these grasses might look like in the garden. This is my favorite also behind me, Sporobolus aerates, which I'll be talking about later. And if you've seen me speak, I shared this one a lot. This one here blended with Origanum Herrenhausen, just absolutely stunning. And then the next photo, we have that kind of very upright dark grass is going to be Andropogon Blackhawks. The blue or the maybe redder grass, a little bit shorter, is going to be Schizachyrium standing ovation. And then we also have Sesleria Greenleaf hybrid, and Sporoblous aerates in here. So this garden was designed by Austin Eichscheid, and you can see he really likes a grass matrix look. And you can create a lot of really interesting textures that way. And then the final photo for warm season grasses here. This one, a nice blend of Pennisetum Hemelm, Sporobolus heterolepis, Deschampsia cespitosa, which is a cool season grass, and actually Millennia moreflame as well. So again, beautiful textures with pops of color from those perennials, really makes for an interesting landscape. So from there, Shannon will take over with Andropogon.
Yes. So, Andropogon is, there are over 100 species that are native to North and South America, Africa, and Asia. And it's actually frequently found throughout the tropics and subtropics, which I thought was pretty interesting since we think of it as such a prairie plant. But there are 13 species native to North America. Many of them are found in southern states. A lot of them are common in the understory of longleaf pines. But Andropogon girardii is found across most of the US, and it's actually found in every county in Illinois, which I thought was kind of interesting because a lot of times you'll see like these random, like one little packet that it's not every county in Illinois native to, and it is the official state grass of Illinois and Missouri. So as many of you probably know, Andropogon girardii is big blue stem, Schizachyrium scoparium is little blue stem. So these plants are closely related, and both major components of the North American tallgrass prairie. So Andropogon provides food and shelter for wildlife. It is clump forming and has a deep fibrous root system that helps them endure poor soils, drought, and neglect. And uses for it can be used in mixed planting, screening, and erosion control. So our first species species that we're going to talk about is Andropogon girardii. So this is going to have green foliage in summer that gradually kind of turns shades of blue and silver, and then takes on more of the reds, oranges, and purples as it gets to fall. As with a lot of these warm season grasses we're going to talk about, they prefer drier soil over being too wet. If they get too wet or into moist deferta soil, they tend to flop. This may self-seed in optimal growing conditions. So it is, again, a clump forming, but I would say kind of a big, wide clump. You can see it's not quite as dense as some of the cultivars that we're going to talk about. And then all of the Andropogon girardii have that turkey foot seed head, so that kind of 3-pronged seed head that's great food for songbirds, and the plant overall makes good nesting space for small mammals. And the nice thing about the Andropogon is they are also relatively deer tolerant. So then we have a cultivar, Andropogon Red October, and this was introduced by Brent Horvath from Intrinsic Perennial Gardens. So it was selected because it's got very upright foliage, and the foliage itself is a little more narrow, but then they found it also just has this fantastic red color. So the summer foliage is deep green. It kind of starts to take on a bit of red highlights and then deepens to a bright kind of scarlety cherry red after the first frost. So really impactful red color. And then the seed heads are also a nice color too. So then we have our next cultivar, and that is Andropogon Blackhawks, which is actually a seedling of Red October. So this one is also from Brent Horvath at Intrinsic. So while it kind of, again, still has that nice green foliage, it takes on a bit more purple in the summer, and then that purple turns to like a super deep, almost black purple when we get those cool night temperatures. So really stunning photo. The photo that Nikki showed a bit earlier, you saw it really well there too, and all those nice fall tones in that picture. I actually didn't realize that photo when I first looked at it. I'm like, where is that from? And it was just like at a different angle than I'm used to seeing that garden. And I'm like, oh, that's at Midwest. So one other thing about Blackhawks is it's a bit shorter than the species and Red October. And actually, what we've seen, and I think Brett has corroborated this when talking to him one time, is it'll actually get the tallest its first year, like maybe closer to the 5 to 6 foot range, and then be closer to 4 feet after that. So kind of gets its biggest, puts all its energy into the first year, and then kind of level out a bit. So just keep that in mind when you're sighting. So these are Andropogon.
All right, next we're going to talk about Hakonechloa. So Hakonechloa is pretty interesting. It's a monotypic genus, meaning there's only one species worldwide of Hakonechloa. So what does that mean for breeding? Most people are just dealing with Hakonechloa macra, so there's not a lot you can do with that. You have to look for kind of probably more naturally occurring varieties. So it is native to Japan, and it is a bunch grass that spreads by runners. Generally speaking, it's a pretty well-behaved grass, and it is deer resistant as well. So we'll jump in because, again, there's only one species. So let's just talk about Hakonechloa macra, and then we'll talk about some of the varieties. So this one forms a nice cascading mound. We trialed Hakonechloa macra after we had all gold and Areola part of our program, and we found this plant to be much more vigorous. It doesn't take over by any means, but it definitely fills a space in much shorter time, and is probably a little bit taller as well than what we see on some of the varieties, but really nice grass. The thing that I think too we just loved about it was its fall color. Really exceptional fall color, shades of orange and red. Will bloom late summer, fall too. Again, if you like the blooms on Hakonechloa, the straight species will give you a more heavy bloom set. And it is deer and rabbit resistant, like I mentioned before. So with all Hakonechloas, you're going to want to site them in drier soils. They might need a little bit of water to like establish, but after that, they tend to like it a little bit on the drier side. Don't let them like dry out completely, but don't overwater them. And they're not suited for clay, so they don't like to sit in a lot of water. They really like good drainage. So that will carry through to the next varieties we talk about. So the first variety we're going to talk about is all gold. So all gold is probably, in terms of vigor, probably the next vigorous, I would say. So the next largest, although again, the size is pretty similar, but anytime you're breeding for foliage color, a lot of times you are breeding the vigor out of the plant. So it does tend to be just a little bit less vigorous, but you'll notice not as many seed heads again on this one in Areola, but really nice plant, good solid pop of color in the shade. So if you're looking for that chartreuse color in the shade, this would be the one for you. So from there, and I know these feel shorter, but again, Hakonechloa macra, what we said there, carries through to all of these. Areola is the variegated one. So this one, again, in terms of vigor, is probably the least vigorous. Plants tend to look the smallest in the landscape and maybe the slowest to kind of get settled, get established, and start spreading. So just be mindful of that. This one does kind of tend to appear to have better fall color, though. Again, I think because of the variegation, it has that nice kind of really limey green and darker green stripation on the foliage. So you'll see that red and orange fall color on this one as well. That's an interesting comment. Somebody said that they find macra and all gold to have the best rabbit and deer resistance. So that's good to know. I have Areola and the straight species planted right next to each other in my garden, and they've been there now for like 3 years. Hakonechloa macra is about twice the size. So, and I have them in a pretty dry shade situation. So just so you guys know that. So that's Hakonechloa, macra, and the two different varieties we carry.
Yeah, and I noticed on the slide we had macro listed as 12 to 18 inches wide, and I think that was probably textbook, and we need to update because
Yeah.
it was definitely more like 24 to 36 inch when we had it in our trial run.
Yes. Yes. It was very happy there.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so next we are going to talk about Panicum. So there are over 400 species of Panicum native on all continents except Antarctica. There have been a lot of reclassifications under Panicum. So some of them were split out. I know like one of the natives that we used to carry is now Deschampsia. So they kind of lots of branches on the Panicum tree. But Panicum virgatum is native to the majority of the United States, primarily east of the Rocky Mountains. And this is another grass that was part of the native tallgrass prairie. So it is very adaptable. It occurs naturally on dry slopes, sand, woodlands, riverbanks, and marshes. It does want sun, so it is not going to be one of the plants that can kind of flex into shade a little bit more. It'll definitely do best in full sun. And this can help restore damaged soil, reduce erosion, and it has also been studied for use as a biofuel. So we have quite a few Panicum to talk about, so we kind of put them together as comparisons a little bit. So first we have the straight species, Panicum virgatum, and this is going to be kind of that nice green foliage, about 3 foot tall and a little bit taller with its seed heads, and those are going to get kind of pink to brown tinged when they come out, and then this has yellow fall color. So that's kind of like our standard comparison point, I guess I'll say. Then we have Cape Breeze, which is also nice green foliage. This is going to be a slightly shorter than the straight species, and you can see kind of that more loose habit, not quite as upright as some of these. I think the name really like speaks well to that. You can, well, so this was actually discovered in Martha's Vineyard, and to that point, it is very salt tolerant, maybe more so than some of the others, but you can see that kind of like loose habit kind of reminds you of like a grass next to the ocean kind of flowing in the breeze. So I think it was very well named there. So this will stay green into October, which is kind of cool. And then it's got those brown seed heads that will take on red tones as it gets cooler. So then our next slide, we're kind of looking at the red foliage panicums. So first we have Hansei Herms, which is an older variety. So this is going to be probably the tallest of the red foliage varieties, and they all kind of have the same transition where they're like a kind of a blue-green summer foliage that gets tinges of red and then turn more deeply red as it gets cooler and we get more into fall. So this is going to have beige flower heads, so maybe not quite as showy as a couple of the others we'll talk about. Also, we don't have it on this slide, but rostral bush is pretty similar to Hansei Herms. So that's going to have a bit more of more burgundy seed heads, but those two are going to be pretty similar. And we also carry rostral bush. So then in the center there, we have Cheyenne Sky. So that was noted could be a good perennial substitution to Pennisetum rubrum, you know, that you use like in a lot of annual plantings. So this could be a perennial swap for that. It's going to be a little bit shorter than the other red varieties, about 24 inches tall with the foliage, and then up to 36 when those flower heads come on. So it kind of holds that same foliage progression, but then this will have wine red flower panicles. And then last we have Shenandoah, which is actually a seedling of Hansei Herms. So again, same foliage transition. And this will have the reddish pink flowers, maybe a bit shorter than Hansei Herms, but this will definitely be taller than Cheyenne Sky. So then lastly, we have more of the blue-green foliage plants. If we go to the next slide. So first there we have Northwind, which I imagine a lot of you are familiar with. This was discovered by Roy Dublick from Northwind Perennial Farm up in Wisconsin. So really nice vertical foliage. This will probably be one of the tallest, if not the tallest, of the ones that we're talking about. That nice, really upright, vase-shaped structure. So it kind of just has a nice medium green color to it, greenish yellow seed heads, but this has really nice yellow fall color. Can take on a bit of orange tones too. I particularly remember looking at this one last fall and being like, wow, that is a very striking fall color. Apache Rose is also an upright, not quite as vase-shaped, a little more columnar habit, but this is going to be sturdy, where it's not going to flop in wind or rain. Really, will stay up through the winter as long as we don't have a super heavy snowfall. So this is kind of gray-green foliage and then takes on some rosy, pinky tinges to it and has those rose-colored flower heads. This is going to be a little bit shorter than like Northwind or Heavy Meadow. And then last we have Heavy Metal, which is the bluest of the varieties that we carry. So a nice metallic blue, really pretty pink, light pink flowers. So a nice contrast between the foliage and the flower heads. And this will be on the bigger side as well, kind of getting about 4 feet with the foliage and 5 feet once you have those flower heads. And then transitions to yellow in fall. So those are our Panicum.
And I think it's worth noting on the blue Panicums, rust can be an issue with Panicum, and I feel like what we've seen, especially in production, is sometimes the bluer Panicums tend to get rust worse, so they need some good air circulation. But it tends to happen in the fall as the plant's going dormant anyway, so eventually it's not a big issue. But just in case that you guys have seen that, that does happen with some of the bluer ones especially. All right, Pennisetum. So this one is this grass is known for its very poofy plumes, and no other grass really has the kind of seed heads that Pennisetum does. Pennisetum are native to Africa, Asia, and other tropical, subtropical, and temperate environments. So they tend to be they're hardy for us, but you go north of here, generally speaking, there's not a lot of Pennisetum that are hardy in more of the northern states. It is good to note that a lot of Pennisetum do need to be planted at least like a month before the first frost. So they do need part of their growing season to be able to establish good roots. Otherwise, they might have trouble overwintering. So if you guys are planting them, plant them a little bit earlier in the fall. And they thrive in sun, heat, and humidity generally. So, and the genus is not the biggest. It only contains 80 species. So relatively speaking, a smaller genera. So the first one we're going to talk about is Hamlin or Hamel. How do you say it, Shannon? I feel like Shannon's like the expert at saying things. This one.
I think Hamelin was probably right, but I say
Yeah.
Hamlin just because, I was used to writing it wrong 20 years ago. So
Same. So either way, however you want to say it's fine. So this one is another oldie but goodie. It's been on the market for a really long time, and I think a lot of people are familiar with it. Kind of mid-sized grass, 2 to 3 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet wide. Prefers full sun. It can handle a little bit of shade, but you will see a reduction in the amount of plumes or flower heads that it puts on. Does prefer soils on the drier side, especially going into winter. It was really interesting. There's some conflicting information out there. Like Missouri Botanic Garden actually says that this one likes it wetter, but I don't think that has not been my experience. So I would recommend it being a little bit on the drier side. Does need to be watered in for establishment, but then after that, it's pretty drought tolerant. And you'll see a medium growth rate. So most of the Pennisetum here, all of them actually, you'll want to kind of shear them back early in the spring. So next one, so that's kind of like our baseline. So next one is Desert Plains. Desert Plains is going to be a little bit larger, with the flowers, can be about a foot taller than Hamlin. This one's a seedling of Cassian, if you guys are familiar with that one. That's a pretty old variety. And this one has really nice fall color on the foliage. So you can see that picture in the top right, really red foliage. So going to get more intense fall color than Hamlin. And then slightly larger seed heads than Hamlin as well. So taller, better fall color, bigger seed heads, kind of the difference from Hamlin. And then the last one we're going to talk about is Love and Rockets. This one is relatively new for us. So we did a pretty substantial Panicum trial, and we were trying to figure out what's next, or sorry, Pennisetum. What's next for Pennisetum and how we wanted to expand, you know, that group of grasses. And this one really kind of wowed us from the fall color to the seed heads. It was really, really beautiful. So this one is going to get about the same height as Hamlin, so same size, but the flower heads on this one are going to be much darker. So they get kind of a dark burgundy purple color, and then the fall color maybe not quite as good as the one we just talked about. Sorry, the name, Desert Plains. So the fall color is maybe not as intense as Desert Plains, but still very, very good. And this one was also by Brent Horvath. Another thing that I read on this one, so Penn State did a big trial on flowering grasses, and this one scored the highest in their Pennisetum trial for flowers. And peak flowering kind of started at the end of July. So it scored 5 out of 5 the entire season, and again, scored first in its genus. So that's Pennisetum Love and Rockets.
Nikki, we had a question about Pennisetum being placed on the invasive species list.
Yeah, so when you read about Pennisetum or research it, in hotter climates, it can seed more and can be a problem. It hasn't really been a problem in our climate yet because it kind of is, I wouldn't say it's borderline hardy in Chicago, but again, if you go north of here, is borderline hardy. So I don't think we've seen a lot of seeding issues, but yes, if you're in the southern states, yeah.
Yeah, I think some either Hamlin or the straight species, you hear a
Yes.
little bit here. But yes, it's more of a southern, like
Mhm.
the University of Georgia in particular is doing a lot of breeding on sterile varieties.
Mhm.
So yes, definitely more of an issue down south. All right, so next we will talk about Schizachyrium. So there are 60 species that are native to North and South America, Africa, Asia, and Australia, so a pretty big portion of the world. Again, Schizachyrium is closely related to Andropogon. It used to actually be under the Andropogon umbrella, and then they split it off and made it its own species. So several species are found in the southern and western US, but Schizachyrium scoparium is most widespread. It is native to all but 2 of the lower 48 states. So it's one of the most widely distributed native grasses in North America. And this is the state grass of Kansas and Nebraska. So first we are going to talk about the straight species, Schizachyrium scoparium. So the summer foliage is a combination of blues, greens, and purples. Kind of takes on like this tone of, you're not really sure like what color you're looking at. It's just kind of a mix. And then that color, that picture on the right is probably a bit more as it's getting into its fall colors. So kind of reds and oranges, a little deeper tones there. So this grows in loose clumps. Sometimes it can almost be a little more like vase shaped a bit. And then it's kind of got those white seed heads. It tolerates both acidic and alkaline soil very well. It wants average to dry soil. So this is another one that if you get it in soil that is too rich or too moist, it is more likely to flop over. Also, too much shade will cause it to flop as well. And so as with many of the native grasses, the seeds are eaten by songbirds and game birds, and it's good for nesting and roosting. And this is another one that is unlikely to be browsed by deer. So then if we get into our cultivars of Schizachyrium, the first is Carousel, which was discovered from a seedling. However, it will not grow true to seed. So I know we've seen a little bit of this in the conifer garden where we have this one planted, is sometimes you'll see seedlings pop up and they'll end up being quite a bit taller than Carousel actually is. So this is shorter, about 24 to 36 inches, and it kind of has that broader base, a little bit wider at the base and more upright. So this holds its form really well through the winter as well. And it's less likely to flop than other cultivars. So it still would prefer to be in poorer and drier soils and full sun, but it can tolerate maybe the more garden type soil a little bit than maybe the straight species can. And this has, again, really beautiful color on it. So kind of blue, green in summer with little bits of pinks. And then you get into reds and oranges and kind of a multi-tone in fall. So really nice kind of short to mid-height grass. Then we have Schizachyrium standing ovation. So this Nikki pointed out in one of those pictures from the Matrix Garden. So this is another blue-green summer foliage, but a much deeper red, purple in fall. And kind of that, like, almost has the basal foliage through the summer, and then as it starts to flower, we'll shoot up and get that added height to it. So this is going to be similar in height to the straight species, but the foliage is wider, and you can see it right there, a little like thicker, strappier foliage than the straight species. And this is another one, I think probably because, it's a selection and can do a little bit better in higher facility soils and can withstand like heavy rains and winds a little bit better than the native species can. And then last we have Schizachyrium scoparium twilight, which has beautiful tones to it. It's like hard, I think those pictures don't really do it justice, but like this really lovely iridescent combination of like light purple and mauve and a little bit of blue. So those are the summer colors. And then it takes on more of a deeper purple and red with a little bit of like even chartreuse coming through in the fall. The thing I will say about this, I was almost on the fence, like, do we leave this in? This is one that we found in like probably a typical garden setting to not be as vigorous. Like it's gotten a little smaller. So I think Nikki and I both like love the foliage and think it's so cool, but it hasn't been the most vigorous plant of the ones that we've talked about. So I would say definitely try it in a couple settings and get comfortable with it and kind of see if you can find a happy spot for it before you go and plant 1,000 of them. So those are our Schizachyrium.
Yeah, the purple color is pretty show-stopping, but dang it, needs to be a little bit more vigorous. So I know we're a minute from time. We have one more genera to go over and just a few plants. So we're going to talk about Sporobolus. And again, you guys are probably familiar with the straight species. And we'll talk a little bit about another one here that's native to North America, and then a variety. So there are many species of Sporobolus that are native to the United States. And again, it's a relatively small genera with 193 species worldwide. And here in America, most of the Sporobolus that are native are really good at feeding birds. So they have a pretty heavy seed set, and birds really enjoy the seed. So pretty versatile plant. And we're going to jump right in to talk about Sporobolus heterolepis, which is native here in Illinois. So this one has really, I think, become really popular to use in more of a grass matrix setting. It's really easy to grow. It tolerates a wide variety of soils. It tolerates wet and dry, periods of wet and dry. You can actually use this one in more of upper areas of rain gardens. So it's a very, very tolerant grass. And it's one that's really good to plant with other spring and summer flowering like native forbs, because the foliage kind of comes up and the plumes don't really come up until the fall. So you get that kind of beautiful show of flowers. And then once those kind of go away, then you get the plumes of the grass. So great kind of design worthy grass. Like I said, drought tolerant. The flowers of the seed heads have a pretty interesting fragrance. It's always a hot topic with Sporobolus heterolepis, whether you like it, whether you don't, whether it smells like cilantro or popcorn. So just note that if you have a client with a sensitivity to smell, it's very, very fragrant. Like it'll hit you if you have a large swath of it. And this one's also host species to six species of butterflies and moths. So, and I found this really interesting. Sporobolus heterolepis is actually endangered in a few states out east and in Kentucky. So very plentiful here in Illinois, but not so much in other areas of the country. So the next one we're going to talk about is one of my favorites, and got to give Austin credit for introducing it to us, Sporobolus aeroides. So we have this one planted in quite a few places, and it's absolutely knocked my socks off. So it is a little bit larger than heterolepis, and it actually likes it a little bit drier than heterolepis. It probably can't take wetter situations, so just something to note. But it flowers much earlier in the season, so you're going to actually see the plumes kind of set in June, so very, very early. And I think one of the things I like about it too is the plumes are actually pink. So when they first come out, you get this beautiful kind of haze of pink over the grass, where Sporobolus heterolepis, it's beautiful. The seeds are tan though, so you don't get that kind of like pop of color from the grass. I also find the fluorescence to be a little bit fluffier and more upright than heterolepis, just in comparison. And again, this one's native to Colorado, so it likes it on the drier side. It's, used to being in more arid conditions. I have it planted in part shade as well. Foliage does fine. It does tend to flower just a little bit less. Still does put on flowers, but a little bit lighter. So that's Sporobolus aeroides. Give that one a shot. And last, but certainly not least, Sporobolus heterolepis terra. So this is a little cutie that I wouldn't even say it probably gets as tall as Sporobolus heterolepis. We have it the same height as the straight species. I think it gets a little bit more compact and definitely more narrow. So it's very, very narrow and vase-shaped, kind of a little exclamation point in the garden. So this one was introduced also by Roy Diblick. Really nice fall color. So heterolepis and heterolepis terra both get beautiful fall color. It'll almost look like a glow. Has a one-up on Sporobolus aeroides on that one. Aeroides doesn't have great fall color, but heterolepis does. It gets kind of hues of red and orange, so very, very pretty. This one's going to be drought tolerant like the straight species. This one's really good for smaller landscape application, or if you just want kind of some pops of that plume happening in the fall. And I think like the straight species too, this plant can handle clay. So if you have clay soils, heterolepis or heterolepis terra will do the trick for you. So we went over a lot of grasses today. Shannon and I were a little nervous about this one. We knew it was going to be pretty vigorous. So we're going to wrap up with a poll. We'd like to know that after today's webinar, what genus did we inspire you maybe to take a look at that maybe you're not looking at now? Out of our own curiosity. And while you guys are polling, I'll just say a quick thank you for stopping by. We really appreciate you guys attending our webinars. This is the last one for the kind of winter season, because spring is here. So thank you for spending some of your Friday mornings with us. If you guys have ideas of webinar topics that you'd like for next year, please reach out and let us know what you'd like to hear, so Shannon and I can start thinking about that. And make sure to follow us on social media too, because Shannon and I will be out in production, out in the gardens, continuing to try and give you guys information all year round. So, okay,
Yes.
Sporobolus, great. And Deschampsia.
I was going to say, Deschampsia, I was hoping was one that people would come away with, and because I feel like it's not on a lot of people's radar. So that's
it needs some love.
Yeah,
for sure. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great 80-degree day. Enjoy it.
All right. Have a good one.